Thank you, Mr. Martin. I usually ask my questions last, so I would ask the indulgence of my colleagues on this side. There's another hearing next door that I'm expected at. Professor Doliak, I received a phone call over the weekend from Cory Booker, who is very interested in this bill. He took a little different approach than one of your former panelists or one of your current panelists in critiquing your research, but I think the underlying questions are the same. So why don't you take a minute and explain to us why you think what is being proposed has the opposite impact?
So there have now been 2 very good studies looking at the impacts of the unintended consequences of ban the box, and 2 studies looking at the impacts of ban the box on people with criminal records. Both meet the very high, rigorous standards of the academic literature here, where the primary concern is isolating the effect of the policy from underlying and completely separate economic trends and other factors that might be driving employment outcomes. The main concern about ban the box is that if employers don't want to hire people with criminal records and we tell them they can't ask, then they are going to try to guess. And because having a criminal record is so highly correlated with race, and especially a recent conviction with age and having whether you have a college degree, in the United States, it's pretty easy to statistically discriminate against young black men who don't have college degrees. And with all due respect to Mr. Martin, the evidence simply contradicts what he thinks is going on. The idea that our research is simply revealing that racial discrimination is a problem. Of course, racial discrimination is a problem, but before ban the box, more young black men were getting jobs than were after ban the box. This seems to have reduced employment for this group and not helped them.
All right. Well, I'm in a very unusual spot among members of Congress, which is I'm open-minded. I haven't made up my mind. I have watched men leave state and federal prison and desperately try to get a job, and the only job they could get in my hometown was washing other people's cars. And thank God for William Hunt and other people who took a chance on these guys that had already paid their debts to society. I'm not talking about people convicted of violent offenses. I'm not talking about people being convicted of crimes against children. I'm not even talking about bad check writers and others who have a hard time rehabilitating themselves. I'm talking about nonviolent drug offenses. And we say, okay, you've served your sentence, you gotta go get a job, you gotta meet your societal and familial obligations, and they can't. So let's assume your research is correct. Let's assume there's a reason you're a professor and I'm not, that you're smarter and that you know how to do studies and interpret other people's studies. Let's just assume that. I don't think there'll be any contradiction on any of that. What do you propose? What would work? For those of us who don't want, we just passed a bill on evidence-based rulemaking not a month ago. Congress, I think, almost unanimously passed a bill that we are going to use evidence and facts upon which to base our policies. And what you're arguing is if you do that, you won't take this approach. Let's assume for the sake of argument that you're right. What approach works?
Great question. So what this policy is hoping to achieve is that we're hoping that by preventing employers from asking about a criminal record, they won't care about the criminal record anymore. That's really the goal of, I think, everyone in this room. We want employers to be willing to hire people with criminal records, and the question is how do we help them do that? So the real goal is to try to figure out what employers actually care about, what they're worried about when they see the box checked on a job application, and then find policy interventions that can directly address those concerns. If employers are worried about work readiness, if they're worried that the average person coming out of prison has much higher rates of substance abuse and mental illness and is very likely to be rearrested in the near future, finding ways to really invest in rehabilitation so that they don't have those associations with a criminal record anymore. That's going to take time. That's the longer-term goal of, I think, everyone here, and it's going to take investment of real resources. In the shorter term, I think the best way to reach the goal that Ban the Box and the Fair Chance Act would have reached in helping those who are qualified for jobs get jobs is finding ways to provide additional information about their work readiness to employers. One policy intervention that's been tried in a few different places and that seems very promising, and research evidence is supporting that it's having the effects we hoped for, is employability or rehabilitation certificates. So if you have a criminal record, and you can go in front of a judge and argue that you've been rehabilitated. There have been very nice audit studies showing that if you send out job applications, randomizing if you have a felony conviction or a certificate of rehabilitation or no conviction at all, those with the certificate are called back at equal rates as those without any conviction. I've heard that those are extremely difficult to get. That can be changed. That's obviously something that is adjustable. But the basic idea of providing more information rather than taking information away seems far more promising.
Well, I'm out of time. I hope you'll continue to do your research. You know, most of us live in a world of anecdote. We don't have the luxury of doing studies. I can tell you in my own life, including with one of your panelists, the very first time I met Inspector Horowitz, he told me something that I otherwise never would have known. Never would have known. It wasn't an important thing. But the fact that he was willing to tell me something that I really wasn't entitled to know, he went up 10 stages in my mind. Just because he was willing to tell me something, it actually had the opposite. It made me trust him, like him, want him to get the job even more. Has there been any research into that, into people who say, you know what, you're going to find this out at some point. Let me be the one to tell you. Because I can imagine employers, even if it is the law, human nature being what it is, may wonder at the end, why didn't you tell me this up front? Is there any, and I know you're not a psychologist, but is there any research into how the listener hears information volunteered from the very person that it could hurt, being the one who volunteers it?
I don't know of any research on that. Anecdotally, I've heard that the guidance that individuals coming out of prison are given is generally to be upfront when they get the interview, to be upfront about their criminal history and to explain, you know, what happened and what they've learned from it and the steps they've taken to change. But I don't know of any research on that. So
right.
It's, at this point, just anecdote.
I really mean it when I say this is my last question. Negligent hiring is a civil cause of action in some states. So for employers who don't want to wait on the government, who want to do it themselves, what protections are afforded them when plaintiffs' attorneys, as they do from time to time, find even an isolated incident where an employer didn't ask and something bad happened and they are confronted with a negligent hiring case? So how do we protect those employers that want to do what Mr. Martin and Ms. Roseberry are advocating for, whether without us doing it, they want to do it? How do you protect them from civil causes of action?
I don't think we have a really clear answer to that yet. It's another area where these employability or rehabilitation certificates seem very promising. These are court-issued certificates that say this person has been rehabilitated and is no longer a risk. And so to the extent that a negligent hiring lawsuit is accusing an employer for putting their customers and other employees at undue risk. If the worst happens and someone that they hire who has a criminal record commits a violent crime on the job, I think that's the worst nightmare of any employer, then they can take that certificate and say, look, I did everything I was supposed to do. This judge said that this person wasn't a risk. There's no way I could have known. So thinking of creative solutions that, in effect, shift the risk from employers to the courts or to government, I think is probably the best way to deal with this negligent hiring concern. And it's not just the legal liability, but it's also worries about bad press. Even if they know that they wouldn't actually lose a lawsuit, they could face very negative media attention that could put them out of business. And that's the catastrophic risk that employers are worried about.
Gentleman from Maryland.